those of us who get to stay and work on a little bit more business, we'll move to item 4 on the agenda. That's a public hearing on proposed amendments to the Harnett Regional Water and Sewer Ordinance. Mr. Wood, would you like to, or Mr. Ward, would y'all like to just give us a quick synopsis? I know we've discussed this quite a bit, but just give us a quick synopsis
Okay.
to begin this process.
Well, the law passed, there was a law passed in June of 2020. It became effective January 1 of this year. And the fundamental change was that developers do not have to pay development fees on the front end. They only have to pay them at the time they get a building permit. So that fundamentally changed the equation. And if you didn't have a process of limiting those capacity allocations, the concern would be that several of the larger ones could monopolize the situation and basically take up all of your available capacity, and that would push out the smaller developers. What you did in response to that was you put a policy in that said you limited them to getting 100 permits for residential 100 units at a time. Then if they had gotten building permits for 50 of those and they were underway, they could come in and request another 100. So they could get up to 150 at any one time. And so that has worked reasonably well, but there have been some issues with that. Obviously, some of the developers feel like that's not enough permits at one time. The other issue that we looked at very strongly, which we thought was a legitimate concern, is some of the larger developments, they want to do 3 different styles of housing in one development. And ours really didn't allow that because we were doing it by phases. And so we've done away with doing it by phases. So that would allow that. For instance, if somebody wanted to take part of their allocation and use it for single family, they could do that. Then if they had some that were condos, they could do that. And even some apartment units or things like that. So it gives them more flexibility there. So what we looked at was what's a reasonable compromise. And in order to do that, we spent a lot of time in this memo explaining to you that our North Harnett wastewater treatment plant is almost allocated out. And so that is the one, as y'all know, we're trying to do a 9 million gallon a day expansion on. But out of 7.5 million gallons capacity, we currently use 5.6, but we already have allocations out there that we've awarded to people of 1.72 million gallons a day. So when you add the 1.72 million gallons a day to the 7.5 million gallons a day, we're at 7.32 now. So the question is, how quickly are those allocations going to translate into building permits and those units come online? The problem we're facing is that, as Steve has told you, it's a 3.5 to 4 year process. You guys, I think it was 2 or 3 months ago, Steve, they gave you the go-ahead. You authorized us to move forward with the permitting process. So where we're at is we are working with North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality to get the permit. We have to have a permit to discharge into the Cape Fear River, and it's called an MPDES permit. We have one. This would be an amendment to that, which would take us from the 7.5 to the 16.5 million gallons. So we can't do anything until we have that permit. And so we do not have it yet. We are working with them on that. Once we get that, then we've already selected the engineer, and he's working on getting the permit. Then we would move into the design phase, and we'll do a preliminary engineering study first. And the reason for that is to get some pretty valid cost estimates before we go to full design. The other major thing we would then have to do is we've got to sit down with our partners on this. We have allocation requests from Fuquay-Varina, Lillington, and Angier, and then as well as what would be the county share of this plant. So what we were looking at is how are we going to deal with the allocations of this through this temporary time, because we're going to be short on allocations. And so that's why it's even more critical that while we're loosening the standards a little bit for a normal policy going forward, we are limited in what we can allocate out right now. And in fact, I'll need to check this with Dwight, but I believe we'll be allocating capacity in the new plant if we give an allocation out. But we can go ahead and let people go ahead with it if those allocations we've made aren't going to be used yet. But bear in mind, that's a 4-year period of time that we've got to kind of feather out that use. So it's even more critical that we have a solid capacity allocation plan. But at the same time, we do agree with some of the folks in the development community that what we have right now is too stringent. So we were trying to hit a balance there. And the real issue is between what we call the typical developers we've had here. And I think I put in here that over a 26-month period, our records indicate all of our subdivision requests, except for one, have been less than 200 lots. And the one was only 230. And we are entering a fundamentally different phase now. We have large national developers, home builders, moving into Harnett County now from Wake County. For instance, we have one request for 1,200 lots, one for 1,000 lots, and another for 2,800 lots. And those three together would be 5,000 lots. And if you multiply that by the 360 gallons per day, which North Carolina DEC requires us based on allocations, that would eat up almost all of our intended new capacity. And so so if you don't have some standard in place, you're gonna eat up all your capacity, and basically the big guys will come in because they have the wherewithal financially, and they will, gobble up those capacity allocations. And so that's why we're saying you've got to have some standard. We feel like, again, what you reacted to in January has worked, but it's probably been too stringent. So we're recommending that you ease off of that. But you've got to have some control on it. Otherwise, basically, the smaller developers are going to get crowded out. I don't know how else to put it. And
well, if you would, so in a nutshell, the recommendation is to increase what?
We are taking the 100 to 200, and actually it'll be to 400, because if you have the 200 when you've gotten permits for 100, in other words, 100 are under construction, you can come in and ask for another 200 if you're willing to escrow the fees on the front end. Because in essence, we're letting them get over and above the normal process.
And
so they would have to escrow that $200. I mean, those $200 permits, and then they, in essence, they could have an allocation of 400 at that point. Well, I'm sorry, they would have used 100 of it, so they would have 300. Then once they had used those down, they could come back. So it's a continuous process.
Well, Mr. Wood, make a clarification. It's you get 200, you get an initial 200 lots. You can have the option to escrow up to an additional 200, so you can have 400 at any given time once you pull 50% of the building permits for your requested allocation. So if you were requesting all 400, once you do 50% of that, you can get another 200.
Yeah.
Now it's 50% of whatever. So if you get your initial 200 and then you escrow an additional 100, then you do 50% of that, so 150, and then you can get your next allocation. So just
what we like about that is, and we've talked to some developers about this, is they can stay in front of that. Because they would go ahead and have their next phase ready to go. They'd already have it through planning. It would be everything is good to go except for the allocation. And then once they, as Chris said, once they had reached that 50% usage, they could file for the sewer capacity allocation. We would grant it, and they're off and running with another 200. So if they do it correctly, they should stay in front of the development, and it would never slow down. And the reason that's important is, there's a cost to mobilize the equipment and everything. And so this way the developer can stay on site and keep going. And the same thing with the builders. They can keep on going. It'll actually be kind of seamless for them. So we feel like this is an improvement. We feel like it's a balance between the really large developers. We think that's going to continue. But the problem you've got, I can't stress it enough, for the next 4 years, we've got very limited capacity. And I do think to protect the county legally, that your permits need to say that you're assured capacity in a new plant, but to the extent that we're able to accommodate that, prior to that, we'll let you go in the other. But that's where we're at on it. The issue, just to refresh your memory, is the reason we're able to do this right now is Fuquay Arena and I believe it's Angier have the most capacity that has been allocated out but has not been used. The problem is those are the two fastest growing areas in the county. And so we're very concerned about how quickly those allocations are going to translate into houses.
Let me also say there's, in the proposed amendment, there are some protections in there. The previous or the existing ordinance doesn't have a clawback provision. This one does. So if the developer doesn't or the builder doesn't pull down 50% of their permits, let's say they request 200 through the normal process. If they don't pull down those 50 within 4 years of the original permit being issued, then we can the county come back and claw back those allocations. So that keeps the plant fresh. That doesn't let somebody come in and occupy a lot of allocation and it sit there for 10 years and not be used. So we feel like that's a valid protection. Also, if a developer requests an additional 200 lots to get them to 400 initially, that requires a separate developer agreement for that 200 lots to let them go into escrow there. They'll provide us those funds, and those funds will be drawn down first for any permits that are pulled going forward.
So in other words, the first 200 building permits, we would be taking that out of the escrow money on the front end, because we really don't want a lot of escrow. We want to go ahead and get the funds for that. So we feel like this is a good balance. Again, most of our, what I would call homegrown developers, are not doing the really large developments, but we've got to take into account that the reality is we now have the attention of national home builders. And so they're going to be here. They're going to continue to come because, as y'all all know, we have the water. And so, and a lot of these places don't. And that's why Fuquay wants to get more water from us. They want more sewer capacity. They want to be part of this plant. Other places are having trouble with that. Johnson County, I think, doesn't even do residential development now with sewer, right?
Just in certain areas. They have designated areas surrounding existing municipalities and along the interstate exchanges.
That's it. They've had to restrict it back because they don't have the capacity.
Yeah, in Johnston County, you can't go out in a rural area, that's 10 miles away from any existing municipality and put up a large-scale development. They just don't have the water and sewer capacity. And that's why big development's interested in us. Nobody else is allocating out 1,000 lots or 500 lots. I would venture you to try to find that somewhere where someone's allocating that number of lots for water and sewer in remote areas away from municipalities. It's pretty unheard of.
Thank you. Appreciate that update. Any questions before we open the public hearing? Okay, at this time we will open the public hearing on this proposed amendment to Harnett Regional Water and Sewer Ordinance that you have heard described here. We just remind anybody that would want to speak to please keep your comments directed to the topic at hand and to address the topic and any members of the board or the staff in a cordial and collegial manner. This time I'll declare the public hearing open. Anyone who wants to speak, if you move up to the podium. Yeah, please give your name and address. Thank you, Mr. Lane.
Harnett County resident, 298 Kirk Islands Road. Just have one question. Didn't hear any discussion whatsoever. Did I hear 10,000 new houses of potential? What does that mean?
No, 5,000.
5,000.
That was just to be clear, that was just those 3 major subdivisions. So
okay.
You'd have more than that because you have all of the other developers that typically do 100 to under 200 lot subdivisions. And so what we're trying to do is have a level playing field where they'll continue to do their developments. They'll just be smaller. But I was just making the point that just those 3 big ones alone would eat up a tremendous amount of capacity in this expansion. And so one of the things we're discussing is the expansion may actually need to be bigger. But the other thing we can do to address that is we may have to cut back on some for these partners, because our first responsibility is to take care of Harnett County.
And with that said, perfect segue into our responsibility is also to take care of our children. I have not heard any discussion. I have seen no plan on how we're going to accommodate the growth that will take place as a result of this expansion, which I'm not against. I'm all for growth. But how are we going to handle it with schools already at capacity in some areas? Is there a plan? If there is, I haven't seen it. I would like to see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lane.
Sure.
Are we using a mic, or can you? It's okay. I just wanted to know if I was speaking into something or not. Hi, my name is Karen Reichert, and I'm from the Northwest Harnett precinct, and I have been concerned about our water. And attending these meetings, I have heard what you said, Mr. Wood, about our supply, and especially on the sewage treatment end, surpassing what we are currently permitted. And so one of my concerns has been exactly this. What are we doing to pair the growth of these building, the number that we're permitting, the number we're allowing, to be able to handle what we currently have, given that we've heard that it could take up to 5 years to bring these new plants online. More specifically, what my concern right now is for our area is we don't have water flow. It's really, really difficult to stand there and watch, if you're farming, to watch what it takes to fill up a 5-gallon bucket. I actually haven't done the measurements, but anyway, so I don't know exactly how this fits into this particular approval of this ordinance, but I do want to let you know that citizens are concerned.
Right.
And every day we drive around and we're seeing trees taken down, more building coming, and we're thinking, how in the world can we do this when we're not even adequately being supplied?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I address that?
Sure, thank you, Mr.
I was just going to say, you're correct on that. There's no question about that. The thing we need to understand is you developed a rural water and sewer district. And rural water, when it starts out, a lot of times they are 2-inch and 4-inch lines. And the reason for that is they're only designed for potable water. And the problem is those lines are inadequate for fire protection. But it also means that as more people move in, those smaller lines, it's very difficult to maintain pressure and that sort of thing. So at some point, this county will have to start looking at possibly paralleling lines along there and things like that, because those lines were never designed for large-scale subdivisions. And and our policy, just so you know, is right now that a developer has to get the lines to his property at an appropriate size. And that is a problem for some of them, because it may be that they have to run a mile or more of larger water line to do that. But that is going to be an ongoing issue. It is in every county that starts out with a rural water district, and that's how most of them started. I've worked in 2 other counties, and one had a fairly extensive system, and we had the same issues. So that will be an ongoing issue for us. But these developers will have to put in the lines, not just within their development, but to get it from the nearest reasonably sized line over there to where they have adequate pressure and flow. If not, then we'll have to look at, is there some other way to serve that area? Or we may say, we can't accommodate that on our system. And then if they want to look at a private system, they could look at that. But your point is well made, and it's going to be an ongoing issue.
Is it something that you can tell us when that would start to be looked at?
Well, we actually have a policy now, and so it's done on an individual basis. In other words, if a developer goes out and buys a 100-acre tract, obviously one of the first things he should be looking at before he writes a check is, can I get water and sewer here? And he should hire an engineer who's going to give him a cost estimate on what it's going to take to see if that's a viable project for him. So it'll actually be individual decisions by developers into particular areas as they go to buy a piece of property and prepare for development.
I understand that, and I appreciate that. I guess what my follow-up question is what is being done for the people, for the private homes that are on the water lines now, that we already are impacted? And I think I understand you to say that will be something that will need to be addressed.
Yeah, well, ultimately what's going to have to happen is, if in areas where the lines are there but they're too small, then the county's going to need to look at that, because at that point the county owns those lines. And so if it turns out that down the road they're inadequate, then we'll need to address that.
And that's my question right
Okay.
there, is when is that going to start?
Can I address that?
Yeah.
It's constantly happening. We're always planning for every area of the county. 95% of the county residents have access to public water now. which is an amazing accomplishment in a rural county.
Yeah.
So it's not like the plant's undersized. It's at 42 million gallons per day, which is a huge water plant for a regional water system, especially in a rural county without a major metropolitan area. So from that standpoint, a lot of planning's already happened. It will continue to happen. Let me say that future development will actually accelerate growth of water supply into remote areas of the county. So in this instance, sewer is another issue. That's a different animal. But the extension of water because of development will actually help that process going forward. So it'll make it much easier because of development's involvement in, like Mr. Wood explained, upsizing lines to meet the county's fire flow requirements of 500 gallons per minute. The upsizing of these lines allows the utility to then attach on and extend even further to serve the most remote areas of the county. So I think that will be pretty much covered. But we're consistently planning and looking at other areas of the county and upgrading our system because of hydraulic limitations.
I appreciate that. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse.
Sure,
but
sure.
My sense is that we have a need that can't wait until there's a development coming in our area to help drive this need. So I just want to put that out there on the table.
Right.
Let you know that we do have that concern. Thank you.
Understood, huh?
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Rebecca Brock, Northwest Harnett, 5220 Christian Light Road. This is a question for you at Regional Water. So if we're doubling or we're really increasing the sewage capacity, which is great, and I'm definitely for development as the 2015 plan has stated, maybe that should be reviewed as well given the growth. But I want to understand that the sewage is then treated and then dumped back into the Cape Fear. Is that correct or not?
Well, it's discharged. I don't know if I'd use dumped, but yes, it's discharged, it's treated, and then disinfected, and then discharged back into the Cape Fear River.
That's
Yes.
a bad word I use.
Yes.
Because you have done the work for it.
Right.
And I'm just curious, if we increase that discharge, is there any, any negative effect on that increased discharge into the Cape Fear?
Mr. Wood alluded to the permitting process that we go through with the state. They look at the assimilative capacity of us increasing the size of the plant. And they place limits on us as to what we can discharge as far as all different kind of nutrients that harm the river going forward. So they'll make sure that we meet those standards.
I'm fine. Thank you.
Huh?
Thank you, Ms. Brock. Anyone else?
I'm Mark Muskowski. I'm actually a landowner here as well. I bought some property off of Ray Road in that particular area. We did that as an investment. I'm a developer. The plan that you outlined, I'm in full support of. I think that's a great compromise between your existing plan and understanding that you're having to look to the future of the plant and you're trying to reach a compromise with developers along the way as opposed to doing nothing. You are trying to do something. So I commend you on that. I think that's a good plan. I'm going to use Ray Road as an example. When we bought the property a few years back, we were looking to develop the property and we ran into some issues with capacity on Ray Road. The lines in that particular area could not handle, the outfall lines could not handle the capacity that we were going to do 200 lots. As most of you may know, 200 lots or less, you kind of only need one entrance, and it seemed like a good, safe project to go in and to do 200 lots. We come to find out we didn't have capacity, so our engineer did a study, and the only way to restore that is to put in a pump station and pump it back down Ray Road to 210 and get into I guess it's the Federal to Fort Bragg system that's there. So that's what we're doing for this particular project, which is going to cost us about $1.2 million. So if we were only allocated 100 lots under the current plan, we could not afford to do that. So to be able to go to 200 lots and maybe eventually 400 lots, the 200 lots puts us at about $6,000 a lot to do the off-site improvements, which is the pump station and the force main. That makes it a little more economical, reasonable till we can pass that on. So your plan, that's an example, I'm giving you an actual piece of property that we want to develop, that your plan now makes it more feasible for the smaller communities of the 200. So I think your plan is spot on until you get your plan up and running. And then in terms of some of the concerns I heard about the economic, about how to take care of the future needs or the current needs of the current residents, just doing, if you're allocated 200, and then you can have another 200 in escrow. So essentially, you're getting 400 lots. The average home price now is around $230,000. You can't, with supplies and materials and lumber, you're not building 200,000 or less houses anymore. So the median price point of 230 times 400 lots, that's $100 million tax base. So that's how you get from where you're at now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, and 10 years from now. That's just one 400 lot subdivision. So to your point, if you've got all these lots coming on, you can do the math on that economic tax base for the county. That's how you pay for upgrades for the current residents as you move forward.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to speak? Okay, seeing no one else moving, then we will bring this public hearing to a close. At this time, I will bring the matter up for discussion and a possible motion from the commissioners. Any questions, discussion, no motion? All right, well, I'll make a motion that we go along with the proposal that Mr. Wood and his staff have presented to us and adopt this change in the current regulations for the lot acquisition, changing to the numbers that Mr. Wood gave us to Harnett Regional Water's Water and Sewer Ordinance. Do I hear a second?
Johnson seconds that.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions on this? Okay, hearing none, then I will call for a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
Okay, so let's go. Chairman Matthews voted aye. Commissioner Johnson, I heard an aye. Commissioner Nicola, no. Commissioner Weatherspoon?
No.
No. Commissioner McCoy? Yes. Motion carries 3-2.